As pretty much anybody with a passing knowledge of film will probably already know, there are quite a few different movie genres out there, and some have been much more popular over its long history than others have. And though not exactly its own genre per se, the Christmas movie is one that has suffered something of a decline. Now, sure, there are plenty of Christmas movies that come out during the holiday season each year, with the Hallmark Channel alone reportedly making around 40 of them within the standard 365-day period. But the thing is, how many of these movies are actually good? And how many of them go on to be big in popular culture? Virtually none. And today, I'd like to explore why that is. Why Christmas movies just don't seem to have the charm that they once did. But let me just clarify that I will only be discussing feature-length, theatrically released movies in this video. TV specials and other forms of entertainment featuring Christmas will not be taken into consideration, as I only want to focus on movies specifically here. Okay, so to start with a bit of a history lesson first, if you go all the way back to the golden age of Hollywood, Christmas movies weren't really a thing in most circles. Most Christmas movies were movies that just happened to take place at Christmas time, with the plots usually being focused on something else, meaning that it could take place at virtually any other time of year, and the story would remain pretty much intact. And this even applies to such classics as It's a Wonderful Life. The fact that it's Christmas Eve really doesn't have much bearing on the story at all. Now, there are most certainly exceptions to this, such as the many adaptations of A Christmas Carol, as well as the 1947 classic Miracle on 34th Street, which some might even consider one of the first true Christmas movies ever made, and a few others as well. But on the whole, movies focusing on Christmas itself, as most people know them today, wouldn't really start coming out until the 1980s, though again, there were exceptions before this. And honestly, that decade may have just been where they peaked, introducing such classics as A Christmas Story, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, just to name a few. Now, what most of these Christmas movies of that time had in common was that they tended to focus on family dynamics just as much as comedy, and always revealed themselves to have the heart that's so integral to Christmas movies, even if they didn't always appear that way at first. In other words, they had figured out a formula for the perfect Christmas movie, and it was a formula that worked very well. But, of course, there were still movies that were set during the holiday season where Christmas itself had virtually no impact on the plot, with Die Hard being a famous example of this. But then, just as quickly as they seemed to figure this out, it all fell apart on them. Once Home Alone came out, it seemed that Christmas movies started suffering in terms of quality, and the public quickly responded in kind. Almost overnight, a genre that had produced so many iconic moments that left people laughing, crying, and hugging their loved ones just didn't seem able to find its stride again. And really, ever since Home Alone's release, many film experts believe that there's only been two Christmas movies that have ingrained themselves deep in pop culture and were able to perfectly capture the magic of Christmas like before, with those two movies being The Nightmare Before Christmas and Elf. Now, what majorly helped The Nightmare Before Christmas was that it gave a very different take on the typical holiday movie formula, making it stand out from the rest. But what's also just as important to note is that it still understood Christmas and the feeling it's supposed to evoke very well, which is a major reason why it works so effectively. And as for Elf, Jon Favreau was specifically going for the wholesome Christmas feeling of the 1980s and managed to capture it perfectly. And that shouldn't be too surprising, considering he's known for being very good at taking specific styles and translating them on screen. Though, considering Will Ferrell was also pushing for an edgier and crude PG-13 movie, many do consider it rather lucky that Favreau was the one who won out in the end, as otherwise it probably would have been a very different and undoubtedly less remembered movie. Now, before all of you start saying it, yes, of course there have been plenty of other Christmas movies released since Home Alone worthy of mention, but none of them ever reached the level of acclaim and attention from audiences as those two movies did. Sure, you have a movie like The Santa Claus, which is most definitely a good Christmas movie, don't get me wrong, but it just never made a splash with the general public and was arguably bogged down by its sequels. And then there's something like Bad Santa, which does actually have all the hallmarks of a good Christmas movie and is pretty well known, but let's face it, when most people are talking about a true Christmas movie, they're talking a soft PG-13 at the most. In other words, it's just as much an anti-Christmas movie as it is a Christmas movie, and honestly belongs in a class all by itself. And then, of course, there were plenty of animated movies released in the 2010s of varying quality centered around Christmas, but most agree that these were usually just average and not really anything special at best. And even when they were, they ended up not getting the attention they deserved, such as with the 2019 traditionally animated Claus. And of course, movies like Love Actually, where Christmas is just a backdrop element to the plot and not the main focus of the story itself, doesn't apply here either, as do the various adaptations of A Christmas Carol. Those are usually going to be good no matter what because of the source material. Now listen, if you like any of the movies I just brought up, or even ones I didn't mention, that's perfectly fine. I'm not trying to attack any of these movies or say that there's anything wrong with them, just demonstrating that ever since Home Alone, Christmas movies have had a really hard time capturing the public's attention, whether they deserve it or not. And the obvious question to then ask is, why is that? Why do so few Christmas movies get attention anymore despite the fact that so many of them are released? And honestly, I think that might just be part of the problem. Oversaturation. When 100 Christmas movies come out every holiday season, not only do they start to blend into each other, but if one of them truly is good and deserving of recognition, they're much less likely to get it because there's 99 other movies that appear identical to it. But I think an even more likely reason is that people might just frankly be a bit sick of the whole thing. In the 1980s, when the Christmas movie formula was perfected, people were amused, touched, and given a taste of the Christmas spirit. And those same movies continue to have that effect on audiences even today. But in the 1990s and beyond, when most Christmas movies devolved into shallow imitations of those older movies without any of the heart or meaning, people may have come to resent what they felt was Christmas movies that were extremely insincere, simply trying to cash in on sentiment by repeating familiar phrases without any effort. And the result was that many came to see Christmas movies as nothing but overly sentimental fluff that didn't mean any of what it was actually saying, relying on countless cliches without any attempt to make them at least enjoyable cliches. And for one other reason, maybe it's just because our society has become more cynical and that Christmas movies just aren't the type of thing people want to see anymore because they see it as overly gooey and emotionally manipulative, whether it actually is or not. But because I don't like giving real world commentaries, that's as far as I'll say as far as that goes. But I still think it could be a possibility. Okay, I'm sure there are plenty of details I'm missing, but I think that covers everything I wanted to personally address. So, to put it simply, whether they're being underused or overused, Christmas movies don't have a lot of luck, both in terms of quality and getting recognition from the public, and the 1980s was really the only exception to that. But in the end, who really knows? As I've already pointed out, hundreds of Christmas movies come out every year, so maybe one will come along that really resonates with the public. Or maybe one that's already been released will be rediscovered and hailed as a classic. Or, as I'm sure some of you will argue, one could even say that there are other classic Christmas movies that both film experts and myself are unfairly overlooking. But either way, with all those movies, as well as genuine classics to choose from, and the TV specials, and the Christmas episodes of popular shows, and everything else there is, it's not like anybody will be running out of Christmas content anytime soon. So there is still that, I guess. Alright, that pretty much wraps it up. So now I'd like to hear what you think. Why do you think there are so few Christmas movies that have gotten so much love and attention from the public since the release of Home Alone? Do you believe it's simply because of a dip in quality, or do you think there's more to it than that? Please let me know in the comments below. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.